I moved into a shared apartment in Portland back in 2019 because rent was impossible to afford alone. My roommate's name was Eric. He seemed normal enough during the first meeting. Quiet guy, worked from home doing some kind of freelance graphic design, kept to himself mostly. That was fine by me. I valued privacy too. The first few months were uneventful. We had our routines. He stayed in his room most of the day. I worked a 9 to 5 at a marketing firm downtown. We'd cross paths in the kitchen occasionally, exchange pleasantries, and that was it. I thought I'd lucked out with a low-maintenance roommate situation. Then I started noticing small things. Eric had 2 phones. One was an iPhone he used openly, always glued to his hand like everyone else. The other was an older Android model I'd catch glimpses of. He kept it in his room mostly, but sometimes I'd see him slip it into his pocket when leaving. I figured maybe it was a work phone or something. People have burner phones for all kinds of boring reasons. What made me start paying attention was how he acted when that second phone rang. It didn't ring often, maybe once every few days. But when it did, Eric would tense up immediately. His whole body language changed. He'd rush to his room and close the door. I could hear his voice through the walls sometimes, low and urgent, but I couldn't make out words. I told myself it wasn't my business. Maybe he had a complicated relationship situation. Maybe it was family drama. I didn't want to be that roommate who pried into everything. But then the packages started arriving. Small boxes, always addressed to Eric, always delivered when I happened to be home. He'd grab them quickly and take them straight to his room. The return addresses were different each time, random names I didn't recognize. I noticed because I had to sign for a few of them when he wasn't home. One afternoon, I was home sick from work. Eric didn't know I was there because my car was in the shop, and I'd taken an Uber home early. I was lying on the couch with the TV on low volume when I heard his door open. He walked past the living room toward the kitchen without noticing me. The second phone was in his hand, and he was staring at it intensely. I stayed quiet. Something about the look on his face made me uneasy. He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and stood there for a moment just staring at the phone screen. Then he made this sound, like a frustrated exhale, and typed something quickly before putting the phone in his pocket. That's when he turned and saw me on the couch. He actually jumped a little. His face went through about 3 different expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, then something that looked almost like fear, then forced casualness. He asked if I was feeling okay. I told him I had a stomach bug. He nodded and said he hoped I felt better, then went back to his room. But the energy had shifted. I felt like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. After that day, Eric became more careful. I wouldn't see the second phone anymore, but I knew he still had it because sometimes late at night I'd hear his voice through the wall. That same urgent tone, speaking to someone. The real turning point came about a month later. I got home from work around 6:30 and found our apartment door slightly ajar. Not wide open, just not fully closed. The lock wasn't broken. Someone had left it open from the inside. I pushed it open carefully and called out Eric's name. No answer. I walked through the apartment checking rooms. Everything seemed normal until I got to Eric's room. His door was wide open, which never happened. He was obsessive about keeping it closed. I stood in the doorway and looked inside. The room was messier than I expected. Papers everywhere, his laptop open on the desk, clothes piled on the floor. But what caught my attention was a small black notebook on his bed, open to a page filled with handwritten notes. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it was crossing a line. But something felt wrong about the whole situation, and my gut was screaming at me to pay attention. I stepped into the room and glanced at the notebook. The page was covered in names, dates, and what looked like addresses. Some names were crossed out. Next to each name was a number, some in the hundreds, others in the thousands. Dollar amounts, maybe. Then I saw my name, written at the bottom of the list with yesterday's date next to it and the number 1,200. My heart started pounding. I picked up the notebook and flipped through other pages. More lists, more names. Some pages had photographs taped to them, pictures of people I didn't recognize, men and women of various ages. Some of the photos looked like they were taken without the subject knowing, grainy distant shots in public places. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment. I dropped the notebook back on the bed and rushed out of Eric's room, pulling his door almost closed like it had been. I went to my own room and shut the door just as I heard the apartment door close. Eric called out a casual greeting. I didn't respond. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, listening to him move around the apartment. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe it was research for a project. Maybe he was writing a story. Maybe I'd misunderstood what I saw. But my name on that list with a dollar amount next to it, that wasn't something I could explain away. I decided to act normal and figure out my next move. I waited about 20 minutes, then came out of my room and went to the kitchen. Eric was making dinner, acting completely normal. He asked about my day. I gave vague answers. The whole interaction felt surreal, like I was talking to a stranger wearing a mask of the person I'd been living with for months. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the notebook, the second phone, the packages, all of it. Around 2 a.m, I heard Eric's door open. Footsteps went to the bathroom, then back to his room. I heard his door close and lock from the inside. He'd never locked his door before, at least not that I'd noticed. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about what to do. Going to the police felt extreme. What would I even say? My roommate has a notebook with names in it. That wasn't illegal, but something was very wrong and I knew it. I decided to do some research on my lunch break. I searched Eric's full name online, along with keywords like arrest, charges, news. Nothing came up. I tried searching some of the names I remembered from the notebook. Most returned nothing useful. But one name, a woman named Teresa Vance, brought up a news article from 6 months ago. The headline made my blood run cold. Local woman reports identity theft and financial fraud. The article described how Teresa Vance had discovered someone had opened credit cards in her name, taken out loans, and destroyed her credit score. The perpetrator had never been caught. Police suspected it was part of a larger identity theft ring. I searched more names from the notebook. 2 others had similar stories: identity theft, fraudulent accounts, financial ruin, all within the past year, all unsolved. I felt sick. I understood what the numbers meant now. They weren't prices. They were credit scores or account values. Eric was stealing identities, and somehow I was on his list. I needed to get out of that apartment immediately, but I also needed evidence to take to the police. I couldn't just accuse him based on a notebook I'd seen while snooping in his room. I decided to wait until evening when Eric usually went out for his run. He was weirdly consistent about it. Every night around 8:30, gone for at least 45 minutes. That evening, I sat in my room listening. At 8:25, I heard his door open. He called out that he was going for a run. I waited until I heard the apartment door close and lock. I gave it 5 more minutes to be safe, then went to his room. The door was locked. I stood there, staring at the handle, feeling a wave of frustration. I should have expected this. He'd started locking everything. I went back to my room and grabbed my wallet. I had a credit card that sometimes worked as a shimmy on cheap locks. Our apartment had the standard builder-grade interior doors with basic locks. It took me about 3 minutes of careful work, but the lock clicked open. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room looked different than the last time I'd been in here. Cleaner, more organized. The notebook wasn't on the bed anymore. I started searching quickly, checking the desk drawers, under the mattress, in the closet. I found the notebook in a box on the top shelf of his closet, buried under some old sweaters. I grabbed it and started taking photos of every page with my phone. My hands were shaking. I kept glancing at the door, expecting Eric to walk in any second. I photographed about 30 pages of names, dates, numbers, and addresses. Some pages had notes about security questions, mother's maiden names, pet names, details someone would need to convincingly steal an identity. Then I found a page that made everything click into place. It was a log of information sources, roommates, previous roommates, people met at co-working spaces, gym acquaintances. Next to each source was a note about what information he'd gathered: access to mail, personal documents, overheard phone conversations. My name was there under the roommate category. Next to it, he'd written, Mail access confirmed. Wallet left visible in common area twice. Mentioned mother's name Patricia in phone call July 1-2. I'd handed him everything. I'd been so careful about big things like locking my bedroom door, but so careless about small details. The times I'd left my wallet on the kitchen counter while making coffee. The phone call I'd had with my mum in the living room where I'd definitely mentioned her name. The mail I'd left sitting on the table while I went to grab scissors. I heard a sound in the hallway outside the apartment. My heart stopped. I quickly put the notebook back in the box exactly how I'd found it and shoved it back on the shelf. I closed Eric's door and rushed back to my room, making sure his door was locked again. I sat on my bed, breathing hard, waiting, but nobody came in. It must have been a neighbor. I looked at the photos on my phone. I had evidence now, clear documentation of identity theft operations. I needed to go to the police first thing in the morning. But then I realized I had a problem. I'd obtained this evidence illegally by entering Eric's room without permission. Would the police even be able to use it? I wasn't sure. I decided to call a lawyer friend first thing in the morning to figure out the best approach. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door. It wouldn't stop someone determined to get in, but it would at least make noise and give me warning. I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Around 4 in the morning, I heard Eric's door open. Footsteps went to the kitchen. I heard the fridge open and close, then footsteps back to his room. At 7, I got up and got ready for work as quietly as possible. I grabbed my laptop, my important documents, and some clothes, and stuffed them in my work bag. I wasn't coming back here until I had a plan. I called my lawyer friend from my car. She told me to go directly to the police with the photos and explain everything. The evidence might not be admissible in court, but it would give them probable cause to investigate and obtain their own warrant. I drove to the police station and spent 2 hours giving a statement and showing them the photos. The detective I spoke with seemed very interested. He said they'd been tracking an identity theft ring in the area, and this could be the break they needed. They told me not to return to the apartment and to stay somewhere safe while they investigated. I went to stay with my sister across town. 3 days later, the detective called me. They'd executed a search warrant on the apartment. They'd found the notebook, the second phone, and a laptop full of stolen personal information belonging to over 40 people. Eric had been arrested. The detective told me I'd gotten lucky. They found evidence that Eric had been planning to make his move on my identity within the next week. I'd discovered the truth just in time. But the phrase that stuck with me was just in time. Because really, I'd discovered it too late. He'd already gathered everything he needed. He'd been living next to me for months, studying me, collecting pieces of my life. If I'd been even a few days slower, my credit would have been destroyed, my bank accounts drained, my identity stolen. I'd been living with a criminal the entire time and had no idea until I accidentally saw that notebook. Even then, I'd wanted to believe there was another explanation. I'd almost convinced myself I was overreacting. The truth was right there in front of me for months. The second phone, the packages, the strange behavior. All the signs were there, but I'd ignored them because it was easier to believe everything was normal. I'd discovered the truth, but barely in time, and that thought still keeps me up at night. I bought a storage unit at an auction in 2021. It was something I'd always wanted to try after watching those reality shows where people find valuable antiques and make a fortune. The reality was less glamorous, but I figured it could be a fun weekend project. The auction was in a facility outside Denver. About 20 people showed up. The auctioneer would cut the lock on each unit, open the door just enough for us to look inside without entering, then start the bidding. You had maybe 5 minutes to decide if you wanted to bid based on what you could see from the doorway. Most units were boring. Old furniture, boxes of clothes, the usual junk people abandon when they stop paying rent. I passed on the first 7 units. Then, they opened number 42. From the doorway I could see it was packed with boxes, neat stacks of cardboard boxes labeled with dates going back years. In the back corner I spotted what looked like vintage audio equipment, some wooden furniture that might be worth something. The unit was clean and organized, not like the chaotic mess of most abandoned storage spaces. The bidding started at $50. I raised my hand at $100. Someone countered with $150. I went to $200, and nobody else bid. The auctioneer called it sold and handed me the new lock and key. I spent the rest of that Saturday moving boxes from the unit to my truck. There were 32 boxes total, each one carefully labeled with a month and year. The dates ranged from 1997 to 2014. All the handwriting was the same, neat block letters written in black marker. The vintage audio equipment turned out to be a collection of reel-to-reel tape players and recorders. Old models from the 70s and 80s. I looked up values online and figured I could sell them for maybe $500 total. Not bad for a $200 investment. I loaded everything into my garage and started going through boxes. Most contained old magazines, newspapers, and books. Nothing particularly valuable. But then I opened a box labeled August 2003 and found something different. Cassette tapes. Dozens of them, each in a clear plastic case with a small white label. The labels had dates and times written on them. August 3rd, 2:15 a.m. August 7th, 11:43 p.m. August 19th, 3:32 a.m. I was curious, so I dug out one of the reel-to-reel players and set it up. These were cassette tapes though, so I needed a regular cassette player. I went inside and grabbed an old boombox from my basement that still worked. I picked a tape at random. October 12th, 1999, 1:28 a.m. I popped it in and hit play. Static for a few seconds, then the sound of breathing. Just someone breathing steadily like they were asleep. It went on for about 30 seconds, then there was a sound like fabric rustling. The breathing continued, more rustling, then the tape ended. I sat there, confused. Why would someone record themselves sleeping? I tried another tape. This one was labeled March 3rd, 2001, 4:11 a.m. Same thing. Breathing sounds, occasional rustling of sheets or blankets, then nothing. The tape ran for maybe 3 minutes before ending. I opened more boxes. Almost all of them contained cassette tapes with similar labels. Hundreds of tapes spanning over 15 years. All labeled with dates and times, all in the middle of the night. I started to feel uneasy. This wasn't normal. Nobody records themselves sleeping for 15 years, unless something is very wrong. I decided to listen to more tapes to see if there was a pattern. I picked tapes from different years at random. Most were the same. Breathing sounds, rustling, silence. But then I played one from June 2004 and heard something different. The breathing sound was the same at first, but then there was another sound underneath it. Faint, almost impossible to hear. I turned the volume up as high as it would go and listened carefully. It was another person breathing. 2 distinct breathing patterns layered over each other. My stomach dropped. Someone else was in the room while this person slept. Someone who was being very quiet and very still. I fast-forwarded through the tape. The dual breathing continued for about 8 minutes. Then there was a creak like a floorboard or door, and the second breathing pattern disappeared. Only one person breathing after that, until the tape ended. I pulled out more tapes and started checking them systematically. I organized them by year and started listening to samples from each time period. The early tapes from 1997 and 1998 only had one person breathing. But starting in 1999, some tapes had the second breathing pattern. Not all of them, maybe 1 in every 10 tapes. And the pattern was always the same. The second person would be there for several minutes, completely silent except for breathing, then leave. By 2005, almost every tape had the second person, and they were staying longer. 10 minutes, 15 minutes. On one tape from 2007, the second person was there for nearly half an hour. I found a box that didn't contain tapes. Inside were journals, spiral notebooks filled with handwritten entries. I opened one at random and started reading. The entries were dated, matching the time frame of the tapes. They were written by someone named Michael. The early entries talked about insomnia and anxiety. He wrote about feeling like someone was watching him, about waking up with a sense of dread he couldn't explain. Then the entries changed. He wrote about finding things moved in his apartment, small things, a chair pulled away from the table, a door open that he'd closed, photos on his dresser rearranged. He blamed himself at first, thought maybe he was sleepwalking or forgetting things, but the feeling of being watched got stronger. He wrote about installing the recording equipment to prove to himself that he was alone, that nothing was happening while he slept. I flipped forward in the journal. The entry from October 1999, right around when the dual breathing started appearing on tapes, made my hands shake. Michael wrote that he'd listened to the tapes and heard someone else in his room. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't see anyone on the tapes because they were audio only. He thought about installing a camera, but was afraid of what he might see. The next several entries described his growing paranoia. He started sleeping with his bedroom door locked. He put tape on the doorframe to see if anyone opened it during the night. The tape was always broken in the morning. He wrote about filing a police report, but they couldn't do anything without evidence of forced entry or theft. Nothing was being stolen. Nobody was hurting him. Just someone coming into his room while he slept and standing there breathing. The journal entries became more frantic. He wrote about barely sleeping, about calling a locksmith to change all his locks, about installing a chain lock on his bedroom door. None of it helped. The breathing sounds continued on the tapes. Then I found the final journal, dated 2014. The last entry was from November 15th. Michael wrote that he knew who it was now. He'd finally set up a camera. He'd watched the footage and seen the person who'd been coming into his room for 15 years. He wrote that he couldn't believe it, that it didn't make sense, that everything he thought he knew was wrong. But he didn't write who it was. The entry just ended with a single line: "I'm going to confront them tomorrow. This has to stop." That was the last entry. And it was dated the same month and year that the tape recordings stopped. I searched through the remaining boxes looking for more journals or any indication of what happened next. I found newspaper clippings, articles about a missing person case. Michael Reeves, age 42, last seen in November 2014. His car was found abandoned near Red Rocks Park. No signs of foul play. Case went cold. I sat in my garage surrounded by boxes of tapes and journals, feeling sick. This man had been terrorized for 15 years by someone entering his home while he slept. He'd finally figured out who it was and confronted them. Then he disappeared. I thought about going to the police with everything I'd found, but what would I say? I had audio tapes of someone breathing and journals describing paranoia. The police had already investigated his disappearance years ago and found nothing. I decided to listen to the last tape, the final recording Michael had made. It was dated November 14th, 2014, the day before his last journal entry. I played it on the boombox with the volume turned all the way up. The familiar sound of breathing started. Then a few minutes in, the second breathing pattern appeared. But this time there was something else. A voice. So quiet I almost missed it. Just a whisper. "I know you're awake, Michael." The recording continued for another minute. Just breathing. Then it ended. Michael had been awake during that recording. He'd been lying there, pretending to sleep while someone stood over him whispering. That's how he finally understood who it was. He recognized the voice. I packed everything back into boxes and put them in the corner of my garage. I told myself I was done looking through it. But I couldn't let it go. I spent hours online searching for information about Michael Reeves. I found his last known address, an apartment building in downtown Denver. I drove past it one afternoon. It was an older building, 4 stories, probably had 10 units. I sat in my car across the street staring at the building and wondering if the person who terrorized Michael still lived there. Wondering if they knew what happened to him. I never found out, and that's what haunts me about the whole thing. I discovered Michael's truth too late. He'd spent 15 years documenting evidence of someone invading his privacy, violating his sense of safety. He'd finally figured out who it was and tried to stop it. And then he vanished. The truth was in those boxes the whole time. Hundreds of hours of recorded evidence, journals documenting years of psychological torture. And it all sat abandoned in a storage unit for 7 years before I bought it at an auction. If someone had found it sooner, maybe they could have helped him. Maybe the police could have investigated while the trail was still warm. But by the time I discovered it, Michael was long gone, and his case was ice cold. I still have the boxes in my garage. Sometimes I think about going through them more thoroughly, looking for clues the police might have missed, but mostly I try not to think about it at all, because knowing the truth doesn't change anything when you discover it too late. My brother died in a car accident in March 2022. Single vehicle collision on a mountain road outside Boulder. Police said he likely fell asleep at the wheel. He'd been working doubles at the hospital for weeks. Everyone said it was a tragic accident. I believed that for exactly 8 months. In November, I was going through old voicemails on my phone, deleting stuff to free up space. I found one from my brother dated the day before he died. I'd listened to it right after his death, but hadn't been able to delete it. I played it again. His voice sounded tired but normal. He said he needed to talk to me about something important. Asked me to call him back when I had a chance. Nothing alarming. I'd assumed it was about borrowing my truck or something mundane. But this time, I listened all the way to the end. After my brother stopped talking, there was silence for a few seconds before the voicemail ended. Except it wasn't complete silence. I could hear breathing, and a voice in the background, too quiet to make out words. I played it again with headphones on full volume. The background voice was clearer. Someone saying, "Just leave the message. Everything's fine." My brother hadn't been alone when he called me, and whoever was with him had been telling him what to say. I called the detective who'd handled the accident investigation, told him about the voicemail. He said he'd look into it, but I could tell he thought I was grasping at straws, looking for meaning in a senseless accident. 2 weeks later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing valuable was taken. Just my laptop and phone, the same phone with the voicemail. I'd backed everything up to the cloud 3 days earlier, completely by chance. I restored the voicemail on a new phone and made copies. I sent one to a friend with instructions to go to the police if anything happened to me. I never found out who broke in or what my brother wanted to tell me. The police eventually closed the investigation. No evidence of foul play, but I know what I heard on that voicemail. Someone was with my brother when he called me. Someone who wanted him to sound normal, and the next day he was dead on a mountain road with no witnesses. I discovered the truth too late. The voicemail had been sitting on my phone for 8 months while I grieved and accepted the official story. By the time I really listened, whoever was responsible had already gotten away with it, and now I'll never know what my brother wanted to tell me that day.